The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Cody.
Speaker, I rise for two requests.
Don't need to proceed.
Our first request, Mr. Speaker, is the General Collector Gentleman from Loudon is waived and press of personal business. Second request, the General Collector Gentleman from Spotsylvania is waived and press of personal business.
Gentleman from Washington, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rest of the first request. The General Collector will seek that the gentleman from Virginia Beach waive and press of personal business.
Gentleman from Westmoreland, Grant.
Let the journal reflect the gentleman from Halifax and Wade, trustee personal business.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rest of the request. Speaker, the General Collector will seek the gentleman from Arlington is waived and press of personal business.
The gentleman from Heights, Mr. Comstock.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
That's quick.
Mr. Speaker, I thought I'd bring everyone up to date on where we stand. If you recall, we adjourned on March the 8th, despite the House's insistence on a 30-day extension. Boy, the wisdom of that has really been borne out if you think about it. Remember, if we would have simply extended, we had the same budget bill and not have gone through all these machinations over the last month. And the other thing would have been, we couldn't have raised money, so the governor couldn't, of course, form this pact, which would have been a good thing. The governor called us back on March the 24th. The Senate did nothing and went home. 2 weeks later, the Senate has gone home again. Now, I think they left around 1 or 1:30 before we even could take action today. So delaying, refusing to act on the House budget seems to be the mantra down there. And so that's sort of where we're at. The budget is a hostage, and that's the point we've been trying to make over and over again. Passing the budget is our most important obligation. You know, you've heard this speech a lot. And hopefully you've actually had a chance to go home to your localities and get it firsthand. There's so many people here that serve on board of supervisors and city councils. And they really are starting to go, what are you guys doing down here? As a matter of fact, the school board budgets, obviously reported visitors for higher ed, they're all setting their budgets. And so why do we have a budget? Why is it a hostage? Because I think Dick Sasslaw said it well, the Senate Majority Leader. He said if we decouple it from the budget, we have no leverage. Why would I do that? And so I think that's pretty sad. This is basically used as leverage. Virginia cannot afford a budget delay and tax all local governments, school boards, colleges, universities, and the business community. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce last week said set aside Medicaid expansion and pass the budget. Now I'm here to tell you like 85 localities, cities, counties, constitutional officers, school boards have said specifically that you need to decouple Medicaid expansion from the budget. We have given on this side of the aisle numerous presentations to those folks. Now I will say I've seen some copycat, both sides do that a little bit. I noticed the other side of the aisle has had several resolutions passed. I think it's probably in the 5 to 7 range, but don't want to give a figure, I'm not sure. So maybe the minority leader, when he gives a speech today, I see him scribble on his legal pad, can tell us how many localities have actually are supporting Medicaid expansion in the budget. But the more fundamental question is this how we're going to go? And I've used the example many times. On this side, we could put school vouchers, we could put whatever cause du jour. From a conservative standpoint in the budget, and every year hold the budget up. But don't take my word for it. Take the word of a well-respected senator on the other side of the aisle, Senator Mark Warner, who I know a lot of folks listen to very carefully over there. And here's what here's what Senator Warner said last year on the government shutdown. We can have disagreements, but you shouldn't threaten to shut down the government. Senator Warner said trying to use the budget process to try and exact concessions over a separate bill would be, quote, this would be like the Democratic Senate sending back to the House something that says, unless you pass our immigration bill, we're going to shut down the government, Warner said. That's not the way you govern. And we all know, we had the big sign up here many, many days. The governor McCall tends to agree with Senator Warner, as he said during the campaign last year, stop using the threat of the government shutdown as a bargaining chip in other negotiations, including over the health care So now, we have a senator and a governor who seem to have changed their minds over the last few weeks, who could not have been more clear last year, obviously, on the decoupling issue. So let me finish up. Holding the budget hostage over one issue is wrong. Republicans and Democrats disagree on Obamacare. We disagree on Medicaid expansion. But we should agree on a budget. We can agree on the rest of the budget for short order. We've given numerous speeches on how close the two budgets are together. Heed the Virginia Chamber. Heed the 85 localities and constitutional officers, the school boards and local leaders who said, get a budget done. We should pass a clean budget and come back in a special session. We've said on numerous occasions, you call it when you want to. Call it 2 days after the special session, you call it in September. We would love to have that today. We're more than happy to come and do it the proper way, as George Allen did with Truth and Sentencing, and Jim Gilmore did with the car tax in a special session. The governor can say when, the governor can send down any bill he wants at that time, as we said. He can send down the two-year pilot, he can send down Mark to Virginia special session, he can send down the 5th iteration, whatever they're doing at this point. We are willing to have that debate, to make that clear, but not with the threat of government shutdown. So let me reiterate, clean budget now.
The gentleman from Charlottesville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, rise for my personal privilege. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen in the House. I think some of you know that in my previous life I did serve local government, so I understand a lot about what the majority leader is talking about. And if I was talking to my city council and the board of supervisors in Albemarle County, the place I represent, I would add to any other localities around the county, I would say one thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we today are ready to act. Today is not about who's holding the budget hostage. Today is about whether we are going to act on a budget that has been passed over there on the other side of the Capitol that has come to us for action. Are we going to take that action, or are we just going to go home? I submit, Mr. Speaker, that we should take that action. And we should either vote on that budget, or we should amend that budget and send it back to the other body so we can get along with the process of getting to a budget. I understand the urgency. That urgency was there weeks ago. I understand the urgency because it is now 90 days since January 1 without closing the coverage gap. I understand the urgency. It's been now $477 million lost to the Commonwealth and its citizens because we have failed to act. Since we left here several weeks ago, a lot's happened. A number of us have had town hall meetings. I had one in my area. I asked all my colleagues from around my area to come. I had a number of people from different perspectives come to that town hall meeting. I would encourage all of you to have person-to-person town hall meetings so you can hear directly from your constituents about the budget and these critical issues. Since we left, New Hampshire has embraced the idea of Medicaid expansion. And since we left, in fact, yesterday, there was a presentation to the Merck about all that has happened with Medicaid reform in the last year or so. And all that has happened includes looking at about $127 million in savings in this budget because of the reforms that have been enacted over the last year. And all that has happened is that the Secretary Hazel has a pretty clear roadmap of embracing the reforms that he's been charged to prepare and present to the Merck. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, we are ready to act. The governor acted when he sent down a bill. The Senate just acted and sent over a bill. Now we can act. We can put that bill on the floor today, or we can amend that bill in House Appropriations to get it here so that we can send it back to the Senate. million in savings because we're closing the coverage gap. Directing $17.1 million for ID waivers, a priority of this House. A 2% base increase in salary for state employees, teachers, and faculty. $17 million for the Line of Duty Act. Millions of dollars for public school spending. So there are pretty good specifics in that bill. But if you don't like it, amend it and send it back to the other body so we can get it in the Congress. Right now, the only barrier to the budget and the process moving forward is right here in this chamber. It's nowhere else. The Senate has done what they needed to do. They sent us over something. Now we need to act. And that is the only way we're going to get a budget. I hope we will act today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the request and a point of personal privilege. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the request made of journal reflect at my seat may, the gentle lady from Fairfax County Court is away and press the personal business. Mr. Speaker, with respect to a point of personal privilege, I listened carefully to Delegate Cox a few moments ago when he recited the same words that he's given in at least 6 or 7 previous speeches. And he told us about a clean budget and not holding the budget hostage. And he also said that we heard several times, go back and listen to your constituents. Now I promise you, I'm not going to stand up here and say, I have gone back, I've listened to my constituents and they said this. Because what I find amazing is that every member so far on both sides go back and listen to their constituents, and the people are either inextricably opposed to Medicaid expansion or wildly enthusiastic. And I find it somewhat ironic that Delegates McQuinn and McClellan and Morrissey from Henrico have listened to their constituents who say we're in favor of Medicaid expansion, but the same delegates from Henrico, Delegate O'Bannon, and Delegate Massey, their constituents are opposed to it. So I won't go that route. But what I have been doing is listening and reading, and Mr. Speaker, you've gotten a lot of press. There's one local journalist who, from the Richmond area, who, with equal enthusiasm, Hillary's both Republicans and Democrats. He stated that Speaker Howe, the Republican leader, Tommy Norman, said this in a recent op-ed piece, their recalcitrance over Medicaid expansion is consistent with, quote, dismissing public opinion, ignoring the broader good, even trampling on people's rights. The same journalist said that the Republicans' refusal to accept nearly $7 billion over the next 4 years of Obamacare subordinates the public office, their public office, to the self-interest of those in power. And then he also said, calling these people the new resistors, found it ironic that 2/3 of these people that are against Medicaid expansion avail themselves of the same health insurance policy that are paid for by taxpayers. He concluded by saying, it appears that the Republicans are saying, or the new resistors are saying, we got mine, you go get yours. But I've been also listening. The Senate Finance Committee had a 4-hour public meeting. Mr. Speaker, you called it, I want to make sure I quote you correctly, more a dog and pony show than a public hearing. Well, here are some of those dogs and ponies that testified. President Teresa Sullivan, President of the University of Virginia. She said the university's academic medical center would serve more poor and uninsured with expanded Medicaid. She went on to say we are a safety net hospital. Victor Iannello, a Roanoke businessman and the chairman of the Trillium Medical Center, said, quote, we are on a dangerous path that threatens the financial viability of hospitals in Virginia. Bill Downing, CEO of the Riverside Health and Newport News, said, failure to expand Medicaid in some fashion would threaten the planned replacement of a new state-based hospital in Nassawagas, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. That's in Delegate Boxer's district. The Senate Finance Committee heard from numerous hospital administrators all across the Commonwealth. From Southwest Virginia, from Hampton Roads to the Eastern Shore, from Danville to Martinsville. These hospital administrators said, if we don't expand Medicaid, hospitals' financial viability is severely threatened. Shepard Milton III, Virginia Beach businessman, was passionate about expanding Medicaid. But the person that I took greater the most heat from was Lori Piper. She's in Arlington County. She's a former executive who became homeless after losing her career to an autoimmune disease. She spoke and she talked about those have-nots that need Medicaid expansion. But I didn't stop there, Mr. Speaker. I read the GOP pronouncements, the epistles that have been sent out by my friends on the other side. In one, the Republican said, Governor Terry McAuliffe is planning to help fund Medicaid expansion by taking money from education and other services. The GOP epistle went out and called it a raid. I said to myself, that couldn't be good. That's bad. Except for 1 week later, PolitiFact came in, Virginia, and said, after a thorough analysis, they rated that as mostly false. But that's a follow-up to my colleague in Henrico County, who said that there's 30% fraud in Medicaid in Virginia. That couldn't be a good thing, I said. So PolitiFact came back and said that Delegate Massey's pronouncement about 30% waste was also mostly false. And Mr. Speaker, I read this morning's paper, your spokesman, that called Governor McAuliffe irresponsible to hold the budget hostage. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the governor at least gave us a plan. He gave us a plan. I also read about three Republican senators, Senators Hanger, Watkins, and Scotch, who together have about 80 or 90 years of experience. They gave us a plan. It's called Marketplace Virginia, and everybody on this side is in agreement with it. But the House Republicans gave us no. That's not my words. That's Senator Stosh on your side. Here's what Senator Stosh said. Quote, the House has not proposed any alternative solutions or any means of returning our tax dollars within the biennium. That's not us, Mr. Speaker. That's Senator Stosh. But at the end of the day, we're told by the majority leader, just be calm. Sign the budget, and we'll all come back. And we'll have a debate, and we'll have the Merck Commission's resolutions. And I'm thinking to myself, how, Mr. Speaker, can Merck do its job when they haven't even met since December until yesterday? How can we accept the majority leader's pronouncement that let Merck do its job when they haven't even met in 3 months? And then, Mr. Speaker, you said, well, in response to Delegate Cox, we'll come back and we'll be open-minded about it. Mr. Speaker, you boasted a year ago that the 5 delegates appointed to the panel, the Merck Commission, formed a firewall against Medicaid expansion. So how can the people on this side of the aisle believe you will really be open-minded? We should really just sign a budget and come back and have that debate when you have said there's a firewall there. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, my great-great-grandparents raised potatoes and turnips in Ireland, but their great-great-grandson didn't fall off that wagon yesterday. We don't have the belief and the faith that if we ready that you promised to have. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Government Plans.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for the purpose of 2 points of personal privilege. Mr. Speaker, first, on personal privilege, I just want to thank every member of the House for the outpouring of support during the time of the death of my father. My mother very much appreciated the notes and the cards, and I shared each of those with her. We're still receiving those, so I appreciate that very much, and very much, as you all know, we are a family, and we do get behind each other and support each other, and I very much appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege. Mr. Speaker, in relation on the House, I didn't know I was going to follow the gentleman from RICO, but it's an opportune time. One of the things as the Vice Chairman of the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission I thought I would do, since we have had a meeting, and by the way, the House members have been willing to meet. The chairman of the Murder Commission is a senator. The first meeting he called was the meeting we had yesterday. We were more than happy to meet at any time. And in fact, the members of the House had talked about having a meeting earlier. And in fact, we discussed about having a meeting during the session that did not occur. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon rather, I wanted to just give the House an update on where we are with the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission and talk about the meeting yesterday and the members of the Murder Commission that went through 5 hours of testimony and information yesterday. This will be a repeat for you also. I apologize for that. I have to give credit to Delegate Brink. I saw him there, and he sat through most of the discussions in the meeting. And so it will be a repeat for him as well. But first of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about what the House members went into the meeting with. We knew what the agenda was going to be. We knew what questions we thought we might have. And we did have lots of questions. I think if you talk to members of the press or any other individual that was there, you would find that we were engaged and were willing to ask questions. The problem we encountered, though, I think from our Senate colleagues and some of the presenters, was that we got an answer most often that they continually said, we don't know because the legislature hasn't passed it yet, related to a plan. Well, Mr. Speaker, it struck me when that was repeated several times, in that I recall back when the Affordable Care Act was being debated, then Speaker Pelosi said that we'll read it after it's been passed. Well, as you all know, we don't handle legislation that way in the General Assembly. We like to read things, we like to question them, we like to consider them before we actually vote on them. And luckily, this isn't Congress. This is the Virginia General Assembly. And that's why we did take time to ask many questions. And more often than not, that's why when we move legislation forward, we consider it carefully. Now, let me talk a little bit about the Marketplace Virginia plan that the Senate has put forward and the questions we asked related to that. Marketplace Virginia and the questions we were able to ask and the information we were able to receive is nothing more than Medicaid expansion. It's been nuanced by individuals, including the chairman, co-chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and the senators. And they're trying to draw a distinct distinction between Medicaid expansion and Marketplace Virginia. But in fact, based on the information we got yesterday, I would consider Marketplace Virginia Medicaid expansion just by another name. It uses Medicaid dollars to cover Medicaid-eligible population through the same type of managed care delivery system that we use currently for Medicaid. And our federal government explicitly says that these are Medicaid beneficiaries as part of the plan. Marketplace Virginia also costs the same as Medicaid expansion and uses the same Medicaid matching rates. Now, one of the things I knew growing up, I never hunted duck, but I know a little bit about ducks and the folks that hunt ducks. When it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and when it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And Marketplace Virginia is Medicaid expansion. Now let me talk about the concerns we had related to how their plan would work in Marketplace, Virginia, and why we think it's flawed and unworkable. It would require a temporary 3-year waiver, a temporary waiver, according to our Senate colleagues. We would have to enter into negotiations with the federal government. The federal government would have to approve everything, and based on what we found from other plans that other states have submitted, with waivers, it really would not provide any flexibility. And more importantly, what would happen when the waiver goes away? We would have Medicaid expansion, because we would be tied into the program, and then we would have to continue to fund it. Now, there are key provisions that they have in the plan that they really are counting on the Senate Marketplace Virginia plan, but we know that those provisions have not been approved in other states' requests through the CMS. The opt-out clause that the Senate is touting in Marketplace Virginia, we have found that Arkansas was told that they would have to wait 7 months and give everyone the right of appeal. That's not an opt-out provision. That's a delayed provision. The cost-sharing aspect that we actually are very interested in. The House members have talked about that in trying to get, if you will, a compromise related to our current Medicaid population. If we could have a cost-sharing provision, that would be very much supported from the House standpoint. In a memo to CMS, that was explicitly said, they explicitly said that the cost-sharing cannot exceed the current Medicaid program. In fact, Michigan's cost-sharing program was deemed to be unenforceable, meaning that you cannot do anything if someone does not pay their copay. Well, if you're going to have someone participate in the plan, just like we do in our private plans, and you're going to have skin in the game, as the Senate called it, we want to have a requirement that you can't just pull out when you want to or be optional. But that's what the CMS has approved, and unfortunately, that cost-sharing provision that we would support has not been approved in any other state. The other is the work search. We had a lot of discussion on that. Unfortunately, no state has been approved for a work search requirement. Pennsylvania recently withdrew their request for a work search requirement because CMS wouldn't even consider it. The Pennsylvania governor, I believe, is a Democrat. Tom Corbett said there was no middle ground with CMS. Maybe it's not. But the problem, again, is that the cost sharing, the opt-out, and the work search requirements that we would very much like to see, those states have approved or have their waivers approved through CMS to allow that. And that's an integral part of what the Senate has talked about in a private sector solution through their Marketplace Virginia plan. Their plan would also require a state exchange. The plan would require Virginia to set up a state exchange like Oregon or Maryland. Let's talk about Maryland first. Maryland spent over $125 million on its exchange. You probably read, especially those of you that hit the Washington Post, not only that they had to basically throw their plan out because it wasn't working and start all over. Oregon spent over $300 million to set up their exchange, and it still doesn't work, and they're looking for special assistance to try to make that plan work. The other problem that we found, and Senator Watkins was a little bit fuzzy on this, but he didn't seem to understand part of the language that was included in his Marketplace Virginia plan, and that is legislative oversight. As you all know, the compromise last year was to set up the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission to look at reforms and then to consider whether we should expand or not. I'm going to talk about the reforms in just a minute. But under his plan, he gives all the authority to the Secretary of Health and Human Resources. Takes the legislature out. There would be no legislative oversight. It would also eliminate, he didn't really seem to understand this, all of Merck's authority. It would become an advisory commission. We have a lot of advisory commissions, but the purpose of the Merck was to compromise to give substance to looking at this very important issue. It would remove all that authority and oversight. The other thing I want to talk about related to this, their plan still relies on borrowed federal dollars. In the best case scenario, it would only cost us $200 million. Worst case scenario, it would cost us over $1 billion. And what would happen if that money were to go away? And we can't opt out, as I've mentioned. If we can, what happens to the 400,000 people that we potentially, as a maximum, as you all know, anywhere from 230 to 400,000 people that will be enrolled under Medicaid expansion? What would happen to them? We just take the services away from them? I think, it makes very clear that the Marketplace Virginia plan really has few, if no, in my estimation, merits. Especially when the best argument for their plan is, well, if it doesn't work, we can just get out of it. That's not a good option. That's not something that we would like to move forward. We'd like to have things thought out, considered, and to make sure that they're going to work. Now let me go quickly, Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, talk about the reforms. Secretary Hazel gave us a very fine report. Last time we got a report, we had green lights, yellow lights, and red lights. I like colors, but we had a little disagreement on whether we were at the green stage or the yellow stage or the red stage. In my estimation, the last time at our December meeting, we were at yellow or red for most all the reforms from the standpoint of showing results and showing the benefit to the Commonwealth related to those reforms. The Phase 1 and Phase 2 reforms, DMAS, is making progress and they're moving forward. He reported that. The Secretary seems to think that they've been completed. Well, they haven't been completed because some of them, the deadlines don't even, from a timing standpoint, get done until this year or next year. That's not completed. Phase 1 and Phase 2 reforms also, we haven't fully gotten reports on what the results are from the cost savings, from the benefit to the individuals, and those figures keep changing. It's like shifting sand. December, it was one figure, during the session was another, and now we have yet another rendition of each of what the figures are. We also know in Phase 3, which is dealing with our ID&D waiver populations, those reforms have not even yet begun. They're just groups working together now to put a plan in place to accomplish that. And that will not be done, and those will not be completed until next year or 2016. So reforms are not done. The other thing we learned, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen in the House, I want to report to you about is we questioned and got information from a local Department of Social Service agency, Floyd County Director, and that's a rural area. Departments of Social Services across the state, according to their report, are behind from the standpoint of the number of individuals they need to currently serve the populations they're dealing with, over 1,000 FTEs across the Commonwealth. I think that's even higher at this point. That was a fairly, I think, old study, maybe 2007, if I recall. So that was one point. I purposely asked the gentleman if he thought if we expanded Medicaid, they were prepared to handle the additional eligibility, signing people up, and have them be able to get the services that they should be able to get to make sure that they're going to get the benefits that they will get. He said they're not prepared. They would need additional resources. They are going to get back to us on what those costs would be for those services that they need to provide. That's a great concern for many of us that don't want to send another unfunded mandate to our local governments. Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen, just to conclude, we're still getting information from the Department. We will have additional meetings, but our work is not complete. It was set up purposely to look at in a serious manner the issues related to reforms and these other issues related to Marketplace Virginia and expansion. As I've said, Marketplace Virginia is simply Medicaid expansion. Our Senate friends like to call it something else, but that's what it is. And we need to call it what it is. Unfortunately, from my standpoint, I think my colleagues would agree on the work from the House. It's flawed, it's unworkable, and it does nothing to fix a system that we already know needs fixing. our Medicaid system. And it relies on borrowed federal dollars. And that argument's been made over time and time again. So, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the House, I hope you will decouple the budget from Medicaid, let the work do its work, and then our localities can move forward, the work can continue to get information, and then we can work to solve the reform issues related to Medicaid for our system that is 22% of our budget currently. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, I'm asked for a point of personal privilege. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, House, feels like spring outside. It's a month since our budget should have been passed. And we sit here today, listening to my good friend, the minority leader across the aisle, talking about we can't act today. Well, we acted 2 weeks ago. We had House Bill 5002. We had a robust debate on the floor of substitute, which was the governor's bill, House Bill 5003. And that was communicated to the Senate. And on the 27th of March, of the budget bill, House Bill 5002 was communicated to the Senate Finance Committee. They could have today sent that bill back so we could have put it into Congress. What they chose to do was come in early and then leave before we got here so we could not conduct people's business. And I wasn't surprised that the minority leader thinks that we should act on the Senate bill. If you look at the history of the way appropriations are done across the nation, they're done with the bill originating in the People's House. Back in, of course, you go back to the day in the Constitution, the Senate had limited involvement in anything that was done with the budget. That changed over the years to allow some input and some action, as it should have been done. Back in 1983 was the first time the Senate actually had a budget to even introduce and present. For the newbies just got elected, we have never, ever considered a Senate budget bill that's come over. I want to repeat that again. We have never, ever considered a Senate budget bill that's been sent over. What we do is communicate it to the House, it goes to the ninth floor, and is held and left in committee. What we do is we decide outside of those two bills, what the Senate's actions were, what our actions were, and they put their bill in the back on top of the House vehicle, it comes back here, we reject it, they insist, and then we go to Congress. That's the way it's always been done, and that's the way it will always be done. Because that's the way it was established in the beginning, and that's the way it should work, because the People's House is where the budget bills always are come from. So what we have today is a stall tactic. Today is a month since we adjourned. My guess is there will be no action on the House bill that's sitting in their committee, and there will be no action on the Senate bill that's sitting in the House committee per the long-standing actions of the General Assembly. I want to make that clear. Not Chairman Jones deciding and dividing this is the way we do business. That is the way we have done business the Virginia way since the beginning of time. So I would say to the gentleman, if he can have any influence with the majority leader down in the Senate to send House Bill 5002 back, we'll come back to Speaker's call. We'll be glad to put it to Congress and then get to work on the people's business. I do want to point out a few things before I sit down. We had a look back a few minutes ago, and I think the testimony of the gentleman who came and spoke yesterday to the Senate. Actually traveled to the Eastern Shore. Met with Mr. Blackson and the folks in Riverside. Nice drive over. Spent about an hour or so with them. Had a nice discussion about where we were and what the pathway forward was. Very good debate, very good discussion. They're talking about they want to spend $75 million to build a new hospital. My point to them was, and directly asked, was, are your problems today due to Medicaid expansion or due to Medicare cuts? And the Medicare cuts are what's killing all the hospitals. Not the fact that we haven't expanded Medicaid. Medicaid components because of the bill that was passed that was never read by Congress. So two bad decisions don't make a right decision, in my opinion. heard me say no to expansion, what you've heard me say is the following. We must reform the existing program, we want to have an 8 limit, so that 22% of our budget is growing 8% a year, and our revenues are growing 4%. They say reforms have occurred, we've reformed 2/3 of the population, 1/3 of the cost. We spend about a little over $4 billion a year on Medicaid, our money, 50/50. So it would be imprudent, in my opinion, to expand, even contemplate expansion until the reforms that are eligible are in place for 12 to 18 months, and we reform those who receive ID and DD waiver services. And I do want to hit on another point that the gentleman from Charlottesville mentioned about the money that's been sent to Washington. Look back, spoke to that. The governor, I think, said the refusal to expand Medicaid will send Virginia tax dollars to other states. They rated that mostly false. That's not me, that's not Jones, that's not Cox, that's not Landis. That is PolitiFact fact-checking what's going on. And $5 million per day, today we get about 28% of that back because of enhanced drug rebates and other things that have been instituted because of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, as we like to call it. And the last thing I'll say before I do sit down is that the governor stated that the Medicaid fraud rate was 0.47%. That was rated as false. We've had testimony in front of Appropriations Committee that pretty much states that they don't know what the figure is, but it could be as high as 30% in some areas of the program. Could be 10 to 15% in others, could be near to nothing in other areas. But when you're spending $4 billion a year of taxpayers' money, it's 10% to the man. A lot of money. So, speak, I would say to the other side, we're ready to act when they send us a vehicle for us to act on. But until the House bill comes back here for consideration, I do not anticipate that people will call us back so we have to act and do things we can.